What's up, everybody? This is Mike Fernandez with Arpent Realty. Congratulations, you made it to the last video in this video series about the 4 problems that every real estate investor must solve if they want long-term success. So this is mostly geared for the newbie real estate investors, but I think there's still probably some nuggets that even you veterans out there will probably appreciate. Um, so I'm not going to run through what we did. I do it at the intro every video, but this is kind of the 4 problems everybody must solve. We're on the 4th one, right? So let's just dive in, okay? So operating the deal. So congratulations, you bought the property, you figured out financing, you got the cash one way or another. Now you own it, and now it's time to actually make it profitable, right? I talked about in one of the videos about how real estate is the fuel that you're going to throw on whatever fire that you have. So if your finances are in disarray, it's going to throw fuel on that fire, and it's probably going to make things worse. If your finances are in order, it's going to make things better. Your long-term net worth, right? I would argue same thing for how you operate your business and your life, right? If things are in a disaster and a mess, then it's going to be very tough to manage a real estate portfolio on top of that, right? But if you have things in order and you're organized and you're staying on top of things, I think you won't have a challenge with this. So the very first thing, it's number 9 on this slide, but we're just going to tackle that head on. Look, I am a property manager, and I will give you a probably unexpected take on property management, right? I think most owners should manage themselves at first, right? I think you won't know if I'm doing a great job or not, which we do, until you do it yourself and you go through the process of finding a tenant, of evicting a tenant, of lease disputes, of tenant neighborly disputes, of handling maintenance requests, right? If I'm your property manager and I say, hey, I got somebody out there to change out a compressor, it's going to be $1,300. You're not going to know if that's a terrible price unless you're actually doing it yourself at first. Now, I will caveat that if you're an attorney or a doctor or somebody who's really busy, right? It doesn't have to be those two. You could be a real estate agent, you could be a lender, you could be whatever. If you are a super busy person and your typical dollar per hour is high, don't deal with this. Farm it out. Let somebody else take care of the headaches. Don't waste your time on it, right? If you're just starting out in your career and you have more time than you have money, manage it yourself, right? Don't bother paying somebody the 10% or whatever we're going to charge you for it. But A, because you can learn those lessons, right? But B, I just think you're better off putting the work and the effort in. Again, aside from the person who either is self-qualify or disqualifies and says, hey, I'm just not capable. I don't like difficult conversations. I don't like dealing with people, whatever. Or if your dollar per hour wage is just too high and doesn't make sense, hand it off to somebody. Otherwise, I would say for the first year, couple years, first couple units, do it yourself, right? Learn the ins and outs, figure it out. That way, again, you know how effective your property manager is. And that's honestly why I started a property management company. I didn't like the companies that I'd hired. I thought they were charging too much for certain things. I thought they weren't handling things like maintenance as good as I could have done. And so I pulled it all back, and we ended up just building the machine that turned into the property management business we have now. But it started with my own personal doors, right? So operate the deal. Look, this is super, super important. I think the rest of it almost doesn't matter. If you're not going to operate it right, then it's just going to be an anchor to your finance and not to your finances, and not a wind in the sails, or not a sail, right? So this is super, super important. So let's say you decide you're going to manage it yourself. You're going to take my advice. You're going to manage it yourself. We're just going to talk through a couple of these things about how to effectively manage it. Let's see. We'll kind of go in order. Look, the rental market the last couple of years has been tough. I'm not going to lie. The last probably year and a half is not what it was. It's better now than it was a year ago this time, but it's not what it was. You can't just stick a for rent sign out in the yard and you're going to get 30, 50 people like you used to, right? You actually have to work. And what we're finding right now is that quality matters more than anything else, right? Quality and obviously price. But tenants do not want to live in a dump, right? You used to be able to have a junky place and you could throw it out and tenants would still rent it. That's not the case anymore, right? We have a lot of people that are moving in with roommates, moving in with family. That bottom tier of the rental market just got crushed. And so you got to stabilize it. You have to make it a nice place that somebody wants to live in, right? You got to do the repairs. It's got to be nice repairs. It doesn't have to be top end, but it has to be done well. A place that people want to live in. Number two is the biggest mistake we see people make: price it right. If I tell somebody, one of my clients, hey, the market is $1,900 for your rent, they're like, well, maybe we try $2,200. That's a big mistake, because what's going to happen is we're going to get less showings. It's going to sit around longer, and then you're going to waste 2 months of rent of what you would get in rent income. You're going to waste $4,000 sitting on it, hoping for the perfect tenant. And then when they don't come, you're going to come right back down to what the market dictates as market rent, right? In my opinion, you are better off either pricing it right at market rent, or in a market like this, I would even say slightly below, right? If market rent is $1,900, price it at $1,850, lease it quick. You can handpick the right tenant who's going to take care of your place and stay there a longer time. I think you're better off going a little bit less. Now, when things go back to a feeding frenzy, maybe that changes. But for now, price it right. And by right, I mean a little bit less. Let's see. Find the right tenant. This is so important. Like screening tenants, the argument all day back and forth is a bad tenant better than no tenant? And I would argue no. I think no tenant is better than a bad tenant. Now, you don't want it sitting vacant because your pricing is wrong, right? Good tenants are passing it up because you're charging too much. But I would rather have no tenant in a place sit empty than have a bad tenant. We've had tenants that in 6 months have done $10,000 worth of damage, caused all kind of issues with the other tenants. We've had, like pest infestations, you name it. A bad tenant is absolutely one of the worst things that can happen to you. So make sure you're screening. We do credit, criminal, and eviction. Eviction's the most important of those. That's the one that's like non-negotiable. Credit, I always tell people, it's less about the exact score and more about the content of what's in there, right? If you have 2 repossessions in the last 6 months and none of your bills are paid on time over the last year, no chance, right? But if you have a low score because you're just starting out in life and you have no credit and you've just never had a credit card, completely different story, right? So we look at the content of it, not just the score. I think a lot of landlords miss out on good tenants because they look at the score alone, right? And then we look at criminal. Now, I tell people this kind of same spiel, right? Look, if you have a DUI from 10 years ago, I could care less, right? But if on the other hand, if you went to prison recently for something violent or something crazy, hey, look, it's probably not a good fit, right? So make sure you're screening those tenants. Also, make sure you're verifying income. And I don't want to say most important, but very, very important is call in previous landlords, right? I can't tell you how many times we evicted a tenant, and I know that tenant went and lived somewhere, but we never got a phone call, right? Or we were just about to evict and we worked out a deal with them where they paid X amount and then they just moved out on their own. Guess what? I never got a phone call on those tenants, meaning they went to somebody and rented from them and they have no idea how bad of a tenant that person is, right? You have to call the previous landlord. Lease, look, that's self-explanatory, right? Make sure you're having a good lease. Don't do the whole verbal, like you want the terms spelled out crystal clear, what their expectations are, what your expectations are, and what happens if either party doesn't fit. This is a contract. I stopped using the word lease in reference in communications with our residents. We don't use the word lease anymore because people think it's willy-nilly. We started using the word contract, right? If somebody says, well, what do you mean I forfeit my deposit if I only give you 2 weeks notice? And I reference, hey, in the contract we signed on this date, it says X, Y, and Z. A lease is a contract, right? And a lot of people don't realize that. You need to have that to protect yourself. Rent collection, make it as easy as possible. Don't be the landlord that I used to be with Excel sheets and missing stuff. And somebody could have not paid some months back when I first started, right? And I probably never would have known. Have a system, have a process, whether you use a management software or not. Have a system and a process, build the machine. With AI, that's 10 times easier today than it ever has been. So it's simple. Maintenance, look, this is what retains tenants. And that's so 6 and 7 we're talking about here, right? Maintenance is what retains tenants. If you're not fixing the stuff that breaks, you're eventually going to have bigger problems, right? A leaking sink is a $20, $50 fix today, but it could be a $250 fix down the road if you have to replace the cabinet, right? Or replace the flooring or something like that. Plus, tenants want to live in a nice place. Surprise, right? How shocking is that? People want to live in a nice place. If you're not fixing the stuff, you're not going to retain that tenant. You're going to have more turnover and it's going to cost you more money, right? Aside from it just being the right thing to do, it's in your financial interest to fix stuff when it breaks. It's a shame that I even have to say that, but I do. Know your numbers, right? This is a big one. Make sure you are tracking all those expenses. Look at how much you're spending on every little thing. It's very, very important. And then again, once you've learned it all and once you feel confident, I think that's the time where you evaluate. Typically, I would say most people, again, aside from those that have a very, very demanding job, most people can manage 1 to 5 doors, maybe 4 doors, something like that, without it being a tremendous burden on their life. Beyond there, dude, just let somebody take over. If you do the math on what you would pay in the 10% management fee versus the time you spend, sincerely do the math and track everything on an annualized average, right? So make sure you track all the showings when it was vacant, the eviction, the time in eviction court, as well as the good months on, hey, just calling somebody to get an AC repair, getting multiple quotes, all those things added up, divide it by 12 to get your monthly, hourly input, right? And then do the math on what you would spend in management. Most times when I do that math with somebody, it's McDonald's labor hours, right? You could go get a job at Raising Cane's making the same amount. It's a no-brainer to hire up at that point. Right? But again, the value in doing it yourself and why my suggestion for a lot of people is to do it yourself is not for the savings, it's for the experience and the learning. So there it is. Operate the deal. There's a lot more to it than this, obviously, but we're just kind of hitting the main categories here. But I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any questions, feel free, shoot me a message, shoot me an email, give me a phone call. I'd love to talk through any part of this that I might need to clarify. But y'all have a good one.